Hi, it's Dr. Turan, and you're listening to The Pop. The Pursuit of Peace podcast is brought to you by SP Consulting Group, where the mission is bringing your vision to life. Welcome back. Okay, so today I wanted to take you all on a journey. The journey of me, and it is for a reason, so don't get any ideas that this podcast is going to be very self-centered. It's actually a journey to where I found you all on this podcast. So let's get started. I was talking to some people that I supervised the other day, and I was telling them a little bit of my background, so I'll start it out that way. Okay, so I went to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. And there I majored in a dual degree. I was both psychology and social work major. And what I did during that time was absolutely nuts now that I look back on it. Okay, so I double majored. I worked 2 part-time jobs. One was for the office of the president. One was like for Bath and Body Works at like the local mall. And I'm definitely putting up air quotes for those of you that know Athens, the mall. And I also was involved in a number of student-led organizations, whether it was the Student Council or the NPHC, the National Panhellenic Council, but also I actually became, and I always say that I became AKA Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. But it was so funny, and I have to give this little brief story inside my story of how I quickly became the president, or in Greek terms, the basileus of my chapter, Delta Phi. And what's crazy is I always, even though it was such an amazing experience, I always think back to the times where I was like, I don't get to do all the things that the other neos get to do. And that's what we call the people that, are new to the organization, neos, because I was running around having to be the figurehead as the president. But either way, it ends up, like I said, it's a story that's going to lead to the story of how I got to be on this podcast talking to you guys. So I was super busy. Either way, I excelled really well. And within a week of actually getting my degree, so after graduation, I literally moved to Columbus, Ohio. And by that, so graduation was probably towards the end of the week. By that Monday, after moving from Athens to Columbus, Ohio, I was already working my first job where I worked for Children's Services. So I worked for Children's Services for 3 years. 3 years doing case management. And as luck would have it, I ended up getting all of the great high crisis cases. Of course, again, being very purposed in that, as I found out years later. But for 3 years, I worked doing social work. I was a social worker. And I think about midway through, maybe by my second year, I decided to go back to school and work on my master's. And in that, my initial thoughts were, there is no way in the world that I'm going to refrain from having to move back home, which, as a young adult is one of the nightmares for some, where it's like, no, I don't want to have to go back. I want to be able to prove that I could make it on my own. So that's what I did. I'm like, let me go back and get my master's, because that way I can make more money and, So fast forward from there, I went on to, actually, this is now maybe my second year in my master's program. Mind you, I worked full-time at Children's Services at the same time that I went to school full-time for my master's of clinical social work. I went to the Ohio State University, and that's where I obtained my master's. But let me just tell you really quickly how, I want people to be able to come to this podcast and get words of wisdoms, and as I like to say, little golden nuggets that will help you along your way. But in the midst of me being halfway through my master's program, I had a supervisor at the time that, for whatever reason, just decided to no longer allow me to have a flexible schedule, which is, at that time, it was up to the discretion of the supervisor to allow you to have that flex schedule while you go to school. As long as I brought to her my schedule in advance, then we were able to work out how would I flex my time in order to leave, whether it was come in late so that I would take my morning classes, or come in early so that I can leave early and go to evening classes, however it worked out. But at some point, she just decided, I'm just not going to do this anymore. This is not going to be approved moving forward. And while some people would have considered that, like, oh my goodness, well, I just can't do this then. No, I went on and began to have conversations with the people that I worked with at a residential facility that was in the local area in Columbus. And well, it was in a suburb of Columbus, and went to them and had this conversation, letting them know what happened and how I needed support. And they said, well, we are open 24 hours because it is a, residential facility. We're always in operation. You're welcome to do some of your, finish your hours that you needed for your internship, because that's how I got connected with them. Finish your hours for your internship on these days, and then like on the weekend you can come in and actually work. We need extra help because on the weekends either the kids need additional programming such as group therapy, or we had them on different outings, especially like on a Sunday is the day that they got to go to different outings, and they needed chaperones and people that had some sort of mental health background to be able to help if there were ever a crisis. And of course, me coming from a place where I was actually dealing with crisis cases, it was perfect. So there you have it. That became my job. I was a group specialist. I was doing group therapy while finishing my hours. And then that's when I ended up going to work for the government, because once that internship was over, then I was just working there full time. And then it was time for me to go to my last year, in preparation for graduation, the next level up of clinical practice. So it was my second year internship, and that's where I began to do my work for a federal healthcare organization. And so next thing you know, I'm working there, and to this day, I work there, and here we are. But one thing that caught my attention, I had been doing crisis work since, a week out from Ohio University, working with crisis cases with children's services. And here I was working with severely mentally ill in a program that was purposed for those that had frequent hospitalizations due to psychosis. So we call the particular population that I was working with the severely mentally ill. SMI, because that's what I was about to say, the acronym for the SMI, severely mentally ill, those that are repeatedly in the hospital for crisis situations. But either way, I was working for that department, and let me tell you, I received little to no help with managing that for myself. Like, I didn't get any help. We talked about the cases, we talked about how we can best help that population. Me personally, I never received help. So I began to wonder about that. How is it that I'm working with this severely mentally ill group of people? And mind you, severely mentally ill a lot of time includes those that have, for example, major depression, major anxiety disorder. A lot of those major anxiety disorders include like post-traumatic stress disorders in its highest form, as far as its highest intensity. And especially for some, it's more of the obvious psychosis, veterans that have some sort of psychotic spectrum disorder. So that can be schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. There were even those that had borderline personality disorder, again, in its highest interpretation of it, but if I can say it that way. But basically, I didn't get help. I was getting stressed out. I was getting burned out. And I'm like, why isn't anyone helping me? The system in itself, as any other large system, any large healthcare system, there's different politics involved, especially in the federal government area. And it's like, how is it that I'm not getting help? Okay, so I kept asking myself that, even as I'm re-experiencing it right now. I'm just like, someone needs to help with this. Next thing you know, I was going back to school. And this time it wasn't about the money per se. It was really about, I gotta be the one to help. I took that on myself. Like, it was just a burning desire. Like, I have to be the one to help. So what I ended up doing was going back to school, and the decision was, am I going to go into law, or am I going to go back into the mental health field and maybe pursue getting a doctorate in psychology? And I wasn't sure which one. Long story short, as I shared with you, I have my doctorate in organizational development psychology versus law. And that was just because, what do you know? I don't like reading about the law. It takes a lot. But instead, I'd rather read a lot about your mind. So that's how that happened. But okay, organizational development psychology. What is that? I basically look at the psychology behind, like, the inner workings of an organization and how it can grow, how it can develop. So similar to what I was doing as a psychology major, similar to what I was doing in practice as a clinical social worker, which in Ohio, I was able to be licensed at the bachelor's level. So I was able to do therapy with support from a senior clinician providing supervision. So in that capacity, I was providing, basically, I was looking at the inner workings of the mind to try to help people. And then I got to the place of trying to look at the inner workings of the organizational mind, the pulse, the culture. What is it about organizational cultures that forget that people are human versus lemmings? Does anybody remember Lemmings? I don't even know how much I remember about Lemmings. I need to Google it. But there was this game way back when I was young called Lemmings. And you could play this game and you can really just set the course of one lemming, and they just like dig and dig and dig away with this like hatchet looking thing in this tunnel, and they just dig, 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 and whatever direction they go in, that's where they had to go. But of course, with the mind of a psychologist, I'm like, but who's making sure the lemmings are okay to just keep digging? And if they keep digging in that direction, they're going to go so deep, they're going to die. So sort of theoretically, that's what I was wondering, like, how in the world are these organizations not paying attention to one of their most significant and most vital assets, the people? If you just keep barking at people and directing them in a direction that they aren't even sure about, let alone know how to go in, let alone are getting help to stay in, like, that can lead to a mess nonetheless. But anyway, I digress. I was trying to tell you guys about my journey. So went to school, and fortunately I found a program with the school called University of the Rockies. And what's great about that school, even though not too many people know about it or they have mixed feelings, still, even in 2019, people have mixed feelings about programs that have a hybrid format, meaning you can both attend in person and you attend online. And that's the program that I had. All of my coursework that was more reading led or book led and conversational in that regard was done online. But when it came down to the practice courses, like learning how to do the personality testing and coaching and the consulting, the executive coaching, those pieces of the program, we had to fly out to the brick and mortar and actually spend time there in these intensive long weekends practicing what it is that we needed to learn in that particular module. So fast forward, I got my degree, but by the time I had my degree, what do you know? I'm here in California. So I was able to finish up all of my classes before I moved. And before I moved, I went to work for another program where I was doing even more intense work, providing trauma therapy and military sexual trauma therapy to those that served in the military. And their families dealing with grief and loss. Bereavement counseling is the formal term of it. And either way, I again was going a step deeper into the intense confines of a person's mind when they're going through it and when they need help. And I really feel like this whole series on help is really sticking to me. And it's because as I went along this journey, I didn't get help. Here I was, a mental health professional, and I didn't get help. There were times where I would purposely seek out a counselor. But then because my schedule was so busy, I didn't have the time. So it's like, so who's helping people that are the helpers and they need time? So, I go from this place of I need help to where's the system that's put in place, that organizational health, the health of the organization that supports people helping, that supports people, period. But for my particular standpoint, it's helping the helper. Who's helping the helpers? I didn't know. I don't know if you know. You may be even one of those people, but it's like, or amongst us people, who's helping us? Who's helping us? And so I'm going down this journey again. Fast forward, I gave you a little sidebar of that additional level of intense clinical care that I was providing, still not getting any help. And people didn't even know that before I left, I almost died. I had to have surgery to have my spleen removed because it just stopped working. I am not going to even try to pronounce the name of the term, but for those that are in the medical field or have experienced it yourself, it was like splenic sequestration. I think I'm going to have to look it up, but it was basically where my spleen stopped filtering out all the toxins in the blood, from what I remember the explanation was. And it just was holding it all in. Your spleen is purpose for filtering out. And it, crazy enough, as I'm thinking about it, is almost like an example of what was going on with me. All the toxins, all the offloads that patients were giving to me, like I was getting filled with that and it just stopped working. So either way, had the surgery. The surgery was purposed for getting the spleen out because it was no longer functioning, and it was at the point where it had gotten so big that it could at any point burst and then ultimately kill me. So had that surgery, moved to California after recovery, and said, I'm going to keep on this journey, but I need to go in a place where I might feel a little better. What else better than to move to sunny California? So that's how I ended up in California. And as I like to say, the saga continues. So you're going to have to stay tuned to part 2 of this particular journey through Shanae's world. But it's going to be fun, I promise. So come back, tune in, and keep listening to my pursuit of peace because it's definitely interesting.